There is a unique, suffocating kind of heartbreak reserved for the woman who sets herself on fire just to keep a man warm, only to watch him use those very flames to light another woman's cigarette. I was born the sole heiress to a billion-dollar shipping and logistics empire, a girl who possessed the world on a silver platter, until I threw it all away for a man who had absolutely nothing. I chose love over legacy, enduring a decade of grueling poverty and exhausting labor to build a destitute beggar into a Silicon Valley titan. But when he finally reached the mountaintop, he decided that the calloused hands that had pushed him there were no longer fit to hold his. He thought he could quietly discard me for a high society trophy wife, laughing at the poverty I had endured just to feed him. But he made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. You can strip an heiress of her trust fund, but you can never strip her of her bloodline. While he was busy plotting my ruin, he had no idea that I was about to tap into the ruthless, predatory instincts of the billionaire father I had left behind, and I was going to use them to send him right back to the gutter where I found him. My name is Cassandra, though for the last 10 years I've just been Cassie, a diner waitress smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. But before that, I was Cassandra Sterling. I grew up in a world of private jets, suffocating gala dinners, and transactional relationships. I hated the elitist, cutthroat expectations of my family. I wanted authenticity. I wanted something real. I found it on a freezing, rainy Tuesday night in downtown San Francisco. I was leaving a charity event when I saw a man huddled inside a broken-down, rusted Honda Civic that was slowly filling with water. His name was Leo. He was destitute, living out of his back seat, but when I bought him a cup of coffee to get him out of the rain, he didn't ask for my money. Instead, he passionately pitched me his idea for a revolutionary logistics software. He had raw, untethered ambition, a brilliant mind, and a desperation that intoxicated me. I fell deeply, foolishly in love with his potential. 6 months later, I brought him to my father's penthouse. My father, a terrifying titan of industry who could spot a bad investment from a mile away, took one look at Leo's frayed cuffs and eager eyes and sneered. "He is a parasite, Cassandra," my father stated coldly, swirling his scotch. "He doesn't love you. He loves the ladder you represent. If you walk out of this door with him, you leave the Sterling name behind. I will freeze your trust, revoke your shares, and disinherit you completely. You will be nothing." Driven by the fierce, arrogant rebellion of youth, I took Leo's hand and walked out. The next 10 years were a masterclass in survival. The reality of poverty hit me like a freight train, but I refused to crawl back to my father and admit defeat. We moved into a tiny, drafty studio apartment. I worked agonizing double shifts waiting tables, coming home with aching feet and bruised pride, handing every single dollar of my tips over to Leo so he could buy server space and pitch investors. I skipped meals so he could buy the one tailored suit he needed for meetings. I became his entire life support system, and miraculously, the sacrifice worked. In our 9th year, Leo's startup caught the attention of a major tech incubator. His software revolutionized supply chain algorithms, and almost overnight, his company exploded into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We moved out of the drafty apartment and into a stunning modern home. We were finally safe. I thought the struggle was over and that we could finally begin our real life together. Until yesterday. I was doing the laundry when I found a sleek, black burner phone tucked into the lining of Leo's gym bag. It wasn't password protected. I opened it, and the fairy tale I had bled for shattered into a million jagged pieces. The messages were a continuous, nauseating stream of affection, luxury hotel bookings, and private jet receipts. The recipient: a woman named Sloane, a wealthy, arrogant socialite who, in a twist of sickening irony, belonged to the exact billionaire circle I had sacrificed to leave. With trembling hands, I scrolled through months of their conversations. My heart stopped completely when I found a message thread from the night before. "Sloane, I'm tired of sneaking around. When are you dropping the dead weight? She doesn't fit in our world, Leo. She dresses like a maid." "Leo, soon, baby. I just have to quietly move the last round of Series B funding into the offshore account so she can't touch it during the divorce. I can't stand her poverty trauma anyway. She acts like waiting tables makes her a martyr. Give me 2 months, I'll bleed the joint accounts dry, and we'll be drinking champagne in St. Bart's. She'll be back in a diner where she belongs." I didn't drop the phone. I didn't scream or collapse onto the laundry room floor in a puddle of tears. The exhausted, devoted waitress who had given up her life for a beggar died in that exact moment. I carefully placed the burner phone back into the gym bag, precisely where I had found it. Leo thought I was just a soft, broken woman who didn't understand how the world of high finance operated. He forgot that before I was a waitress, I was a sterling, and the sterlings never lose. I zipped the gym bag shut, the metallic sound startlingly loud over the quiet hum of the laundry room appliances. For a brief, agonizing moment, the air in the room felt too thick to breathe, heavy with the weight of a decade of wasted sacrifice. But as I stared at the black nylon bag, the suffocating pressure didn't break me. It crystallized me. The panicked, heartbroken waitress who had spent 10 years desperately trying to prove her worth to a man who had none simply ceased to exist. In her place, the dormant instincts of Cassandra Sterling, the woman raised in boardrooms and trained by apex predators, snapped violently awake. When Leo walked through the front door an hour later, I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of marinara sauce. He strolled into the kitchen, shedding his bespoke suit jacket and tossing it carelessly over the back of a dining chair. He smelled of expensive scotch and a floral perfume that was definitely not mine. "Dinner smells good," he remarked casually, not bothering to look at me as he opened the refrigerator to grab a bottle of sparkling water. I'm exhausted. The investors are breathing down my neck about the upcoming merger. It's nonstop, Cassie. You have no idea the kind of pressure I'm under to keep this lifestyle afloat. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his performance was almost impressive. He was standing in a kitchen I had scrubbed, complaining about the pressure of maintaining a lifestyle he was actively plotting to steal from me. "I know you work so hard, Leo," I said, keeping my voice soft, compliant, and perfectly level. I turned and offered him a warm, supportive smile. "Just tell me what you need me to do to make things easier for you." He offered a patronizing chuckle, stepping forward to pinch my cheek as if I were a naive child. "Just keep doing what you do, Cass. Keep the house quiet. I handle the heavy lifting." I let him eat the dinner I cooked. I let him complain about his day. I played the role of the oblivious, simple-minded domestic partner to absolute perfection, masking a lethal, freezing rage behind every nod and every smile. I allowed him to feel completely secure in his superiority, knowing that his arrogance would be his ultimate undoing. The moment he fell asleep that night, the heavy, rhythmic sound of his breathing filling the master bedroom, I slipped out from under the covers. I walked softly into his home office and booted up his laptop. Leo was a brilliant software engineer, but he was a remarkably sloppy criminal. He assumed my brain only functioned in terms of tip percentages and grocery budgets. He forgot that before I was serving coffee, I was the heiress who had taught him how to read a profit and loss statement on the floor of our drafty studio apartment. He forgot that I was the one who had set up his initial corporate firewall. I knew his passwords. I knew his security questions. By 2:00 a.m. I had bypassed the basic encryption on his private drive. What I found inside was not just a case for divorce. It was a sprawling, meticulously documented felony. Leo hadn't just been cheating on me with Sloane. He had been funding her high society lifestyle using seed capital from his Series B investors. I pulled up the internal ledgers and cross-referenced them with the hidden offshore accounts he had bragged about in his texts. The digital paper trail was undeniable. He had set up a dummy shell corporation, billing his own startup for external algorithm consulting, and funneling millions of dollars out of the company's operating budget. I traced the money. There were wire transfers for a $4 million penthouse in the financial district, deeded exclusively to Sloane. There were receipts from Cartier, private jet charters to Aspen, and exorbitant charges at Michelin-starred restaurants. He was systematically bleeding his own company dry, artificially inflating the company's valuation to secure the upcoming merger, and hiding the liquid cash to ensure I wouldn't see a single cent of it when he inevitably handed me divorce papers. But the most damning piece of evidence wasn't the stolen millions. It was the genesis of his company's equity structure. When Leo first incorporated 10 years ago, he couldn't get a bank loan. I had funded the initial incorporation using a forgotten, low-yield municipal bond that my father's lawyers had somehow overlooked when they disinherited me. Because my name was the only one on that bond, the initial seed capital for Leo's startup was entirely mine. According to the original incorporation documents I was currently staring at, I wasn't just his wife. I was technically the foundational majority shareholder of his entire empire. I spent the next 4 hours downloading every ledger, every forged invoice, and every offshore wire transfer onto an encrypted external hard drive. When the sun began to rise over the California hills, I closed the laptop, leaving it exactly as I had found it. I had the ammunition. But to execute the kind of total, scorched earth destruction Leo deserved, I needed a weapon far bigger than a divorce attorney. I needed a monopoly. 3 days later, while Leo was away at a tech conference, which GPS tracking confirmed was actually a weekend in Napa Valley with Sloan, I dressed in the only piece of designer clothing I had kept from my past, a sharp, structured black blazer that screamed corporate warfare. I drove downtown to the financial district and pulled up to a towering monolith of black glass and steel, the Sterling Building. Walking into that lobby for the first time in a decade felt like stepping into a parallel universe. The air was cold, smelling of polished marble and expensive leather. The security guards didn't recognize the 32-year-old woman in front of them, but when I approached the front desk and spoke my name, the receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard. "Tell Arthur Sterling his daughter is here," I commanded, my voice carrying the unmistakable, inherited cadence of absolute authority. "And tell him I brought a highly lucrative acquisition target." 10 minutes later, the heavy mahogany doors of the CEO's office swung open. My father was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He had aged, his hair was completely silver now, but his presence was as terrifying and immovable as a mountain. He turned slowly, his sharp, predatory eyes scanning me from head to toe. He didn't rush forward to hug me. He didn't offer a tearful apology. We were Sterlings, we didn't do sentiment. We did business. 10 years, Cassandra, my father said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone. "I assumed you would eventually get tired of playing house with a vagrant. Are you here to ask for your allowance back?" "I don't want an allowance, Arthur," I said, walking directly to his massive desk. I didn't sit down. I reached into my bag, pulled out the encrypted hard drive, and dropped it onto the polished wood with a heavy thud. "I want a partnership, and I want to hand you the most profitable tech acquisition of the fiscal year for pennies on the dollar." My father arched a silver eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. He walked over to the desk and stared at the drive. "Explain." "Leo's company is finalizing a massive merger next month," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "He's currently valued at $300 million, but his valuation is a fraud. He has been aggressively embezzling from his Series B investors to fund a mistress. The proof is on that drive. Every wire transfer, every shell company, every forged invoice." My father picked up the drive, rolling it thoughtfully between his fingers. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing as he searched my face for weakness, for heartbreak, for the naive girl who had walked out on him 10 years ago. He found nothing but ice. "He stole from his investors," my father mused, a dark, dangerous smile slowly pulling at the corner of his mouth. "And he cheated on you." "He made a business decision to liquidate my future," I corrected smoothly. "I am simply responding in kind. According to the original incorporation documents, I am the majority shareholder of his tech firm. I want you to initiate the merger through one of our subsidiary shell companies. I want you to be the buyer he thinks he's selling to." My father let out a sharp, genuine laugh, a sound I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. The respect in his eyes was immediate and absolute. He recognized the ruthless, calculated strike of a predator. He recognized his blood. "You want me to buy him out," Arthur said, leaning against the edge of his desk. "And then what?" "Then," I said, my eyes completely dead, "we present the forensic audit to the board right as the ink dries. We terminate him as CEO for criminal fraud, we strip him of his remaining equity, and we leave him personally liable for the millions he embezzled. He walks away with nothing but the clothes on his back." Arthur Sterling looked at the daughter he thought he had lost to weakness, realizing that the decade of poverty hadn't broken me, it had forged me into a weapon. "Welcome home, Cassandra," my father said softly, sliding the hard drive across his desk toward his private terminal. "Let's go hunting." The morning of the merger arrived with a thick, rolling coastal fog that swallowed the San Francisco skyline, a fittingly dramatic backdrop for the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. Inside our modern, minimalist home, Leo was a vibrating wire of nervous, arrogant energy. He stood in front of the hallway mirror, meticulously adjusting the Windsor knot of a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, his eyes alight with a greedy, feverish anticipation. Today was the day he believed he would officially ascend to the ranks of the untouchable elite. Today was the day he would sign a $300 million acquisition deal with a private conglomerate, cash out his shares, and shed the dead weight of his past. I stood in the kitchen, dressed in a faded, oversized sweater and yoga pants, pouring him a cup of black coffee. I played the part of the devoted, exhausted waitress one final time. "I won't be home for dinner tonight," Leo said, not bothering to look at me as he took the coffee cup from my hands. He took a sip, grimaced slightly, and set it down on the granite counter. "Actually, Cassie, we need to have a serious conversation this weekend. I've outgrown this dynamic. I'm going to need you to start looking for your own place. The company's legal team will send over some preliminary separation documents on Monday. I'll make sure you get a generous lump sum to help you get back on your feet." A generous lump sum. A severance package for a decade of my life, offered by a man who had built his empire using my blood, my sweat, and my stolen inheritance. "I understand, Leo," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion, a blankness he entirely mistook for defeated submission. "Good luck today. I hope you get exactly what you deserve." "I always do," he smirked, grabbing his leather briefcase. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the heavy, suffocating illusion of our decade-long marriage instantly evaporated into the morning air. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I walked into the master bathroom, turned on the scalding hot water, and washed away the smell of the diner, the grime of the struggle, and the pathetic, compliant persona of Cassie the waitress. When I stepped out, I drove directly to the Sterling estate in Pacific Heights. Waiting for me in my childhood bedroom was a styling team my father had summoned at dawn, alongside a garment bag delivered directly from a high-end European boutique. I stripped away the cheap cotton and stepped into a razor-sharp, stark white Alexander McQueen suit. I clasped a vintage diamond choker around my neck, a piece of jewelry that cost more than Leo's entire Series A funding round. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon, and my lips were painted a deep, unapologetic crimson. When I looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, I didn't recognize the woman who had spent 10 years agonizing over grocery bills. I saw Cassandra Sterling. I saw an apex predator. Downstairs, my father was waiting in the grand foyer, flanked by 3 men in dark suits, the most terrifying, ruthless corporate litigators on the West Coast. Arthur Sterling looked at me, a rare, genuine smile of approval breaking across his stoic features. "The buyer's representatives are already in the boardroom," my father noted, checking his platinum Patek Philippe watch. "Leo is preparing to sign. Are you ready to close the deal, Cassandra?" "I've been ready for 10 years, I replied. We stepped into the back of a blacked-out Maybach, gliding silently through the city streets toward the glass and steel monolith where Leo's tech firm was headquartered. On the 50th floor, inside a sprawling, glass-walled boardroom that overlooked the foggy bay, Leo was holding court. From the hallway, through the slightly parted double doors, I could see the scene perfectly. Leo was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. Sitting directly to his right, wearing a sickeningly smug smile and the $4 million Cartier necklace Leo had purchased with embezzled funds, was Sloane. She was there under the guise of an independent PR consultant, but everyone in the room knew her true role. She was waiting to be crowned. At the opposite end of the table sat the acquisition team for Apex Holdings, the shell company my father had created specifically to facilitate this trap. They sat in stony silence, their briefcases open, the $300 million merger contracts resting in the center of the table. "I want to thank the representatives from Apex for their incredible foresight," Leo announced to the room, standing up and buttoning his jacket, preparing to deliver his victorious monologue. "When I started this company, I had nothing but a vision. I built this from the ground up, utilizing my own genius, my own sweat, and my own unparalleled drive. Today's acquisition is not just a merger. It is a validation of self-made brilliance. It proves that with the right leadership and the right people by your side." He gestured warmly to Sloane, who beamed back at him. "There is absolutely no limit to what can be achieved." He reached into his breast pocket, unscrewed the cap of a solid gold Montblanc fountain pen, and leaned over the thick stack of contract papers. "You're about to sign the wrong line, Leo," I said. My voice cut through the sterile, quiet air of the boardroom like a gunshot. The heavy mahogany double doors swung open, pushed wide by my father's security detail. I stepped into the room, my white suit practically glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights, the diamonds at my throat catching the glare. My father walked in immediately behind me, followed by our trio of corporate litigators. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and utterly chaotic. Leo froze, the gold pen hovering an inch above the signature line. His jaw unhinged, his eyes widening in a mixture of profound confusion and rising terror. He looked at my designer clothes, the diamonds, and the terrifying posture of absolute authority I commanded. He couldn't reconcile the woman standing in front of him with the waitress he had dismissed just 3 hours earlier. Sloane let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest, her eyes darting between me and my father. She recognized Arthur Sterling immediately. In the high society circles she occupied, my father was a god. "Cassie," Leo stammered, his voice cracking, the polished CEO facade instantly disintegrating. What are you doing here?" "Security." "How did she get up here?" "Security works for the building owner, Mr. Vance," Arthur Sterling rumbled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He stepped forward, his presence suffocating the room. "And I own this building, just as I own Apex Holdings, the company you are currently attempting to sell to." Leo looked as though he had been physically struck. He stared at my father, then slowly turned his horrified gaze back to me. "Apex, you, Cassie, what is this? Who are these people?" "My name is Cassandra Sterling," I said, walking slowly toward the head of the table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. "And these men are my legal counsel." "You'll want to put the pen down, Leo. You don't have the legal authority to sign that document." "What are you talking about?" He barked, a desperate, panicked anger flaring in his eyes as he tried to regain control of his boardroom. "This is my company. I am the CEO, the founder, and the majority shareholder. You're my wife, you have no standing here." "I have every standing here," I interrupted, placing both of my hands flat on the mahogany table, leaning in so close I could smell the stale fear sweating out of his pores. 10 years ago, you couldn't get a bank to look at you, let alone secure a business loan. You needed $30,000 to formally incorporate, lease server space, and patent your algorithm. I funded that initial capitalization using a municipal bearer bond. I snapped my fingers without looking away from his eyes. My lead attorney stepped forward, dropping a thick, red-tabbed legal binder directly onto the contract Leo had been about to sign. "A municipal bearer bond," my attorney stated loudly for the entire room to hear. "That was drawn exclusively from the Cassandra Sterling Irrevocable Trust. According to California corporate law and the foundational articles of incorporation you filed a decade ago, that seed capital does not classify as a marital asset. It classifies as a direct equity investment by the Sterling Trust. Which means, Mr. Vance, my client does not own 50% of this company through marriage. She owns 82% of the voting shares through direct foundational equity." The absolute silence that followed was deafening. I watched the blood completely drain from Leo's face, leaving his skin the color of dirty parchment. The air was sucked out of his lungs. He looked at the binder, his eyes wildly scanning the highlighted articles of incorporation that proved he was nothing more than a minority stakeholder in the empire he thought he ruled. "No," Leo whispered, stumbling backward, his knees hitting the edge of his leather chair. "No, that's impossible. You were broke. We were broke." "I was never broke, Leo. I was just in love," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. "I gave up $1 billion inheritance to sleep in a freezing car with you because I believed you had a soul. I spent 10 years waiting tables to build your pedestal, and how did you repay me?" I didn't wait for his answer. I picked up a second folder from my attorney's hands and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped directly in front of Sloane. "You repaid me by forging consulting invoices," I announced, raising my voice so the remaining board members could hear every damning syllable. "You embezzled $8 million of Series B investor capital to buy a penthouse and Cartier jewelry for your mistress. You artificially inflated the valuation of this firm to facilitate a fraudulent cash-out merger, planning to bankrupt the marital accounts and leave me with nothing. Sloane scrambled backward in her chair, pushing away from the table as if the folder were coated in anthrax. She looked at Leo, her eyes wide with a panicked, aristocratic revulsion. "Leo," Sloane demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "Is this true? Did you steal that money?" "It's not what it looks like," Leo pleaded, his hands shaking violently as he looked between me, Sloane, and my father. "Cassie, please, we can figure this out. We're married. We built this together." "We didn't build anything together," I said, my posture perfectly straight, looking down at the man I had once thought was my entire world. "I built you, and now I'm tearing you down." The silence in the boardroom stretched, agonizing and heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and impending professional ruin. Leo looked as if the very air had been sucked out of the room, his chest heaving as he stared at the financial audit spread across the table. His hand, still clutching the gold fountain pen, shook uncontrollably. He tried to open his mouth to offer a rebuttal, to weave another of his charming, manipulative lies, but the words died in his throat. He looked toward Sloane, hoping for a lifeline, but she had retreated into the corner, her face pale, frantically tapping on her own phone, undoubtedly deleting messages, and severing their connection before the inevitable collapse took her down with him. The 3 corporate litigators my father had provided were already working, distributing copies of the forensic audit and the original incorporation documents to the Apex Holdings acquisition team. The lead representative from Apex, a man whose face had been a mask of stone since the meeting began, slowly closed his briefcase. He turned his chair toward the head of the table, his gaze locking onto Leo with a look of clinical, detached professional disgust. "Mr. Vance," the representative began, his voice cold and devoid of any corporate politeness. "We were brought here today under the assumption that we were acquiring a legitimate, high-growth enterprise. We were not briefed on the fact that the company's foundational capital was misappropriated, nor were we aware that the current CEO was using investor funds to finance personal criminal activity. This entire deal is tainted by fraud. We are pulling our offer, effective immediately. Furthermore, we are initiating our own internal investigation to report these findings to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Leo's legs gave way, and he slumped back into his leather chair, a hollow, broken shell of the man who had walked in that morning. The $300 million future he had spent a decade stealing had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. He wasn't just a failed CEO, he was a liability that the industry would now treat like a radioactive waste site. I didn't offer him a look of sympathy. I stood by my father, who was watching the scene with the grim, satisfied expression of a man witnessing the predictable end of an amateur. "The board of directors for Sterling Dynamics," I announced, my voice clear and ringing in the sterile room, "has reviewed the evidence of financial misconduct. As the majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. Michael Vance, you are hereby terminated as CEO for cause. Security has been instructed to escort you from the building. You are to surrender all company keys, devices, and access codes. You are to depart the premises immediately." Leo tried to speak, his voice a pathetic, broken rasp. "Cassie, please, we can talk about this. Don't do this to me. We have 10 years, we have a life." I walked around the table, stopping just inches from him. I leaned down, lowering my voice so only he could hear the full, biting truth. "You didn't have a life, Leo. You had a host. You had a decade of charity, and you chose to spit in the face of the woman who made you. You aren't a CEO. You're a beggar who forgot who bought him his first suit." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and frantic, realizing for the first time that the waitress who had cooked his meals and waited tables for 10 years had never really left. The billionaire heiress had been watching him the entire time, waiting for the exact moment when he would be arrogant enough to think he had won. "Get him out of my sight," I said, standing back up and turning my back on him. 2 security guards, massive men in dark suits, stepped forward, grabbing Leo by the elbows. He didn't fight back. He was already defeated, his body limp and trembling as they hauled him toward the double doors. Sloane, watching the spectacle from the corner, clutched her handbag and bolted for the hallway, hoping to disappear before the board members could turn their attention to her. I didn't care about her. She was a symptom, not the disease. As the boardroom doors slammed shut behind Leo, muffling his pathetic, desperate protests, the lead attorney for my father stepped forward, holding a thick, stapled document. "The postnuptial severance agreement, Cassandra," he said, handing me the final, notarized document. "It's all here. The debt liability, the equity forfeiture, the admission of guilt for the misappropriated funds. It's ironclad." I took the document, my fingers feeling steady and light. I signed the last page, finalizing the absolute, permanent severance of my life from his. My father stood up, walking over to stand beside me at the head of the mahogany table. He looked out over the city skyline, the fog beginning to burn off under the mid-morning sun. "You handled that with the precision of a master, Cassandra. I underestimated you." "You underestimated the sterling name," I corrected, looking out at the city I had spent 10 years trying to stay out of, and which I now realized I was perfectly capable of running. "What now?" my father asked. "The board needs a permanent leader. The company is in shambles, but the technology is sound. It's a clean slate." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the board members who had once been intimidated by Leo's arrogant, fake charisma. Now, they were waiting for my direction. They were waiting to see if I was just a ghost from the past or the future of the firm. "We restructure," I said, my voice authoritative and calm. "We bring back the core engineering team Leo sidelined. We pivot the R&D back to the original algorithm he ignored because he was too busy chasing venture capital for his side hustles. And we rebrand. We remove the Vance name from every piece of stationery, every building, and every server. By tomorrow morning, this firm will be Sterling Tech, and we will become the industry leader within 6 months." My father nodded, a glint of genuine, fierce respect in his eyes. He had spent his life waiting for someone who could carry the weight of his legacy, never imagining that the daughter he thought he had lost would be the one to save it. I turned to the board members. "We have a great deal of work to do. Let's begin." As the board members scrambled to pull out their laptops and open the new project files, I felt a strange, electric sensation in my chest. It wasn't the thrill of revenge. Revenge was a hollow, temporary satisfaction. It was the profound, exhilarating realization of competence. I was good at this. I had been good at this before I ever met Leo, and I had refined my skills in the crucible of poverty and struggle. He had tried to steal my life and sell it for parts, but he had failed to realize that the person he was stealing from was the only one who actually knew how to run the machine. I sat at the head of the table, the same place he had sat hours ago, and began to work. The rest of the boardroom was filled with the sounds of keyboards clacking, people discussing logistics, and the quiet, productive hum of a company finally being run by the person who had actually built it. I felt no bitterness for the lost years, and no regret for the sacrifices I had made. The past was exactly where it belonged, behind me, and for the first time in 10 years, the future was entirely my own to design. I wasn't reclaiming my throne. I was building a brand new one, and this time, it was built on a foundation that not even a catastrophe could tear down. The transition from a diner waitress to the co-CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire was not without its friction, but I navigated it with the kind of ruthless, hyper-focused efficiency I had learned on the floor of that drafty studio apartment. Over the next 6 months, the tech firm, now officially rebranded as Sterling Tech, underwent a massive, systemic purge. I didn't just fire the executives who had been complicit in Leo's embezzlement. I dismantled the toxic, arrogant culture he had cultivated. I took my place beside my father, not as a prodigal daughter asking for a handout, but as a battle-tested equal. My father possessed the cold, calculating vision of a traditional titan, but I brought something to the boardroom he never could: the profound, gritty empathy of someone who knew exactly what it felt like to have nothing. I understood logistics, I understood the people working on the ground floor, and I understood how to spot a hustler from a mile away. Under our joint leadership, Sterling Tech didn't just recover, it dominated. Within 8 months, our valuation surpassed the original merger offer by a staggering margin. The criminal fraud charges against Leo moved through the legal system with a brutal, unforgiving speed. Stripped of his corporate protections, his fake equity, and the stolen millions that had been swiftly reclaimed by my legal team, he was left entirely defenseless. He avoided a lengthy prison sentence by accepting a plea deal, but the financial restitution wiped him out completely. He was legally barred from holding an executive position in the tech sector ever again, and his reputation was so thoroughly radioactive that not even a low-level startup would risk associating with his name. As for Sloane, the moment the FBI seized the multi-million-dollar penthouse she thought she owned, she vanished from the San Francisco social scene entirely, retreating to the East Coast in a shroud of public humiliation. I didn't keep tabs on Leo. I didn't look him up, and I didn't care to know where his spectacular fall from grace had finally landed him. I was far too busy building my own empire to look down at the rubble of his. Exactly 1 year after the boardroom coup, I hosted a private dinner for the Sterling Tech Board of Directors to celebrate a record-breaking fiscal quarter. We dined at a highly exclusive, Michelin-starred restaurant nestled in the hills overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. I wore a sleek, custom-tailored charcoal suit, my hair cut into a sharp, uncompromising bob. I felt powerful, centered, and entirely at peace. As the evening wound down, I stepped out through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant into the cool, crisp night air. I handed my ticket to the valet stand and waited on the curb, scrolling through a brief email on my phone. "Ms. Sterling, your car." The voice was rough, breathless, and entirely devoid of the confident, commanding arrogance it once possessed. I slowly lowered my phone and looked up. Standing next to the open rear door of my black Maybach, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting red valet jacket that smelled faintly of exhaust and cheap soap, was Leo. The physical toll of the past year had devastated him. His face was deeply lined, his shoulders slumped under the heavy, crushing weight of public ruin and insurmountable debt. His hands, gripping the handle of my car door, were calloused and shaking. He looked exactly like the man I had found huddled in a rusted Honda Civic a decade ago. Only this time, the desperate hunger in his eyes was replaced by a profound, agonizing regret. He stared at me, his eyes wide and shining with unshed tears. He looked at the tailored suit, the flawless posture, and the sheer, untouchable wealth radiating from me. "Cassie," he choked out, his voice cracking, completely ignoring professional protocol. He took a hesitant half-step toward me, his hands raising in a pathetic, desperate plea. "Cassie, my God, please, I have nothing. I'm drowning in the restitution payments. I sleep in my car. Please, I was so wrong, just give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to talk to you. I'm begging you." He was waiting for a reaction. He was waiting for the soft, empathetic woman who had once skipped meals just to buy him a suit. He wanted me to yell at him, to gloat, or to show him some flicker of recognition that would validate his existence in my world. I looked at him, searching my chest for even a single, lingering ember of the fire I had once burned for him. There was absolutely nothing. He wasn't a monster anymore, he was just an inconvenience. I didn't say a word. I didn't smile, and I didn't scowl. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out a crisp, single $100 bill, and held it out to him. Leo stared at the money, his face crumbling as the absolute, chilling reality of my indifference washed over him. His hands shook as he slowly reached out and took the bill. I offered him a single, dismissive nod, stepped into the back of the Maybach, and closed the door. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the glittering city traffic, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I was entirely focused on the road ahead, a valuable lesson for the listener. If there is one profound, echoing truth to take away from Cassie's journey, it is this: never sacrifice your inherent worth to build a pedestal for someone who does not respect the foundation you provided. For years, Cassie defined her value through her ability to sacrifice. She mistakenly believed that if she just gave Leo enough of her time, her energy, and her resources, she could eventually love the entitlement right out of him. She thought her devotion would buy his loyalty. But a parasite does not respect the host it feeds upon. It only grows arrogant as it consumes. Society often romanticizes the idea of the ride-or-die partner, the woman who stays through the darkest, lowest moments, shrinking herself to make her partner feel large. But true love and true partnership should never require you to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. You cannot rescue someone who is perfectly content to watch you drown to save themselves. True power isn't just about the wealth you inherit or the money in your bank account. It is about recognizing your own profound value. It is having the strength to stop pouring your life into accounts that yield absolutely no return. Do not let your kindness, your grit, or your loyalty be the fuel for someone else's greed. Have the absolute courage to walk away from those who exploit you. clear the debris of their entitlement, and unapologetically reclaim the throne you were always meant to sit on.